More than 30,000 people in BC are still waiting to return home. They were forced out of their communities because of the wildfires blazing through the province's interior. But some evacuation orders were lifted this weekend. Residents of 100 Mile House and Princeton were allowed to return home. CBC's Aaron Collins is on the story live from Kamloops. Aaron, the people who were allowed to return home, I guess they're not doing the happy dance just yet. Does it mean they're out of harm's way?
Well, they're out of harm's way, but they're definitely not stable in their situation, I suppose you could say. They've been sent home. You mentioned 100 Mile House, which was the last group of evacuees to be given the green light to head home. We heard about Princeton earlier over the weekend and Cache Creek. So those folks are allowed to make their way home, but they've been told they're still under an evacuation alert, which means keep your gas tanks full, and you might have to turn around and head back out at any point, because there are still, 150 fires operating within the interior of British Columbia, and these folks are not out of the woods yet. And of course, once they get home, there's still lots of work to be done to get life back to normal. And a lot of that begins with sort of some basic chores that you have to do to stock the fridge and this kind of stuff. Have a listen.
All you can do is hope for the best and realize it's all just things that can be replaced. We're all together as a family, so that's the most important part, right?
Change of clothes, pair of pajamas, that's really what it's all about. So if this ever happens again, and it could, I know what's going and what's not, and it's not going to be 2 vehicles worth of stuff.
So not going to be 2 vehicles worth of stuff. People hopefully learning some lessons that they can hopefully don't have to employ, but maybe able to employ in coming days if the situation does change and they're forced to leave their homes again.
And Aaron, any indication when people from other communities might be able to go home?
Yeah, you mentioned in the introduction there, still 30,000 people across the interior of British Columbia waiting for that green light to go home. Probably the largest community that's waiting to hear if they're going to be able to get the chance to return home is Williams Lake. That's a hard-hit community. A lot of people there have been out of their homes for a solid week now. And, in these evacuation centers, a lot of rumors, a lot of word going around about when they might be going back. They'd heard from the mayor that perhaps it would be early this week. But then they also heard that winds in that area might be changing that situation. Here's one resident from Williams Lake that was staying at the evacuation centers here in Kamloops. This is what he had to say.
Doesn't look like the wind's going to be too much, but they're worried about if it changes again, it could come back, and then the weather's getting hot again. So, yeah, who knows? So I think that's part of what they're waiting for.
So, that's probably the hardest part for folks at these evacuation centers is the waiting. The waiting really is the hardest part. And on top of the winds and the weather, if it does cooperate, there's still a lot of other things that need to come together for those folks from Williams Lake to be able to make their way back home. We heard from the mayor on Friday that they do have a solid amount of power in the community. That's okay. They've got a grocery store open, a pharmacy up and running. But the key thing that they're working on is getting the emergency room at the hospital working. They need to have that in place before they let people go back home. My understanding is that should be up and running at some point today. Fingers crossed. And of course, those folks from Williams Lake are also waiting to hear that news as well.
Thank you, Aaron. CBC's Aaron Collins in Kamloops. We've got a map for you illustrating the current situation in BC. You see those flame icons? They represent what BC Wildfire Service calls fires of note. There are 22 of them burning across the province's interior right now. Officials say 18 new fires were reported yesterday. 4 of those were caused by people. More than 4,000 people are fighting a total of 150 wildfires in the province.